Ashley, can you hear me?
No.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I don't have a screen for some reason.
It shows that your video is enabled.
At least my hair is. Really help.
This is not it.
Now I don't know.
Somebody's got feedback.
You got to get on this meeting.
Okay, I will. Not sure.
We have two Franks here.
Yeah, except that you can hear me, Kathy?
Reverberant. I think you got to close this. Or one of them. We'll close this one. Close this one.
We have time to get this straightened out. I was watching Dr. Fauci and the doctors yesterday before Congress. There were some senators that were like falling in. I couldn't understand what they were saying. Not a single word. And neither could Dr. Fauci. Looks like everybody's getting haircuts. Richard, you have a haircut?
That's nice, huh? I have to note, prices did go up.
They did. They charged me a huge uptick.
Yep, yep.
Gallery, that's how I went to gallery.
Mhm.
Right. Last time that we did it.
narrow Frank's screen.
There it is. Oh, thank God.
Microphone on or off?
I don't know. Can anyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great.
Sounds a little bit chipmunky.
Yeah. There's some noise in the background.
Greg, what you might be able to do is mute your computer and turn off the volume and then just call in by phone.
You talking to me?
Yes.
Why?
So-
Why? You can't hear me, or you can hear me, right?
There's like a feedback.
Oh, feedback.
Yeah, it has like a little chipmunky
Okay.
sound to it.
Okay, there's a lot of chipmunks around here. Yeah, shut that off.
Unless you're a licensed wildlife. I just read this. You can't catch a chipmunk or any animal and rehome it yourself.
Get that. Maybe that volume is up too high. No, hold on a second. I want to. Where was that volume?
John got a haircut too.
All right, Ashley, say that again. I should call in.
Actually, it sounds a lot better now. So
Okay. Squirrels went away.
There's a little bit of like, it sounds like an echo after you speak. There's a little bit.
Maybe I was too close to the. How about now? Is it better now?
Ooh.
it has its good moments and bad moments.
You can probably ignore it.
Should we just,
Yeah.
Frank, can we leave
Yes.
you mute maybe until you're ready to talk? Is that okay?
Okay.
That's I don't know. Ashley, you tell me. You're the.
Yeah, no, let's do that. Let's just mute until you're ready to speak.
Okay.
Right.
I can do it from my end.
Okay. All right. Then.
There you go.
All right. All these fresh haircuts. Cindy, we lost you.
You're not muted though.
No, we can't hear you at all. If it's not one thing, it's another.
Looks like she's gonna sign back in.
Yeah, she's gonna try again. When we first started this, she for some reason was having a lot of problems and like had phoned in a couple of times. I don't have fancy equipment, so mine seems to work.
Okay, how's that?
Much better.
Works.
Maybe it's better if you don't hear me. I don't know.
I don't know. All right, we're all here. And it's 7 o'clock. So let's call this meeting to order. It's June 24th. This is the Village of Mamaroneck Planning Board meeting, a regularly scheduled meeting. If we were all together, I would notice the fire exits, but there's no reason to do that right now unless you want to know how to get out of your house. But I don't know. So we have one item on the agenda tonight. And it's 139 East Prospect Avenue, which is before the planning board for a site plan and a special permit. We have an open public hearing. Tonight, we're going to consider the secret determination for this project. I just want to remind everybody, because I had to take a step back and remind myself where we are with this application, because it seems like we've been looking at it for months, because we have. But we're still really at the beginning of the application. We opened a public hearing because the code requires that we do so for the special permit application. And that happened back in January. The next step is the environmental review, which determines what the procedures are going forward. And this is all according to either New York State law or village code. So the environmental review is known as SEQRA, and that's the State Environmental Quality Review Act. We typed this action as an unlisted action back in January. And our next step is to determine the environmental impact of this project and whether it's severe enough or large enough to warrant a full review. That's where we are now. We're not deciding on the project. We're not voting on the project. That's several steps down the road. The next step after we determine the SECRA determination is for the applicant to go before the HCZM for consistency review. HCZM determines if the project is consistent with the LWRP. The planning board's work stops until that happens because oftentimes the project changes during that review. And when that's completed, and if assuming that consistency is found with the changes that are made, it's back and forth many times, then we come back to the planning board for the site plan and the special permit review. So that's where we are right now. So during our initial review, a couple of issues have come up, mostly code issues. So that's what we want to talk about a little bit tonight. That's why we have our building inspector with us, Frank, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, Tavolacci. Give me a thumbs up. Okay, good. My husband's part Italian, so I got the Italian down. So the couple of issues that came up were the application of the flood code and the multiple dwellings law. And obviously this is very important because the code and the laws guide our decision making with all of our projects. We don't do things because we like them or we don't like them or whatever, although the aesthetics does play into the site plan review and some of the things we do, but mostly we are following the codes. So before we begin, we have a privileged and confidential attorney-client communication from our attorney, Ms. Mason. And I need a vote to release the confidentiality so we can discuss the contents of this memo. It's regarding the multiple dwellings inquiries. I believe it's already been shared with the applicant and it's been shared with the building inspector. No, it hasn't.
The building inspector, but not the applicant.
Okay. So I need a motion to release the confidentiality of this memo so that we can discuss it at the meeting tonight.
So moved.
Second.
All right.
It doesn't matter, just go.
Right.
We got it. I mean, I guess Betty Ann is not with us tonight. She's on vacation. I don't think she's tuning in from home, at least I hope not. But she will be looking obviously at the tape in order to do the minutes and we reflect who makes motions and who seconds and things like that. Okay, so the vote is on whether or not to release the memo for discussion tonight. Richard?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Cindy?
Yes.
And I vote yes, and we are missing Mr. Mendez this evening. We're wishing him a happy wedding anniversary. He's excused from this meeting for good reason. Okay, so with that, why don't we start with the multiple dwellings law. And I guess to give a little recap, when the project came to us, the building inspector had deemed it zoning compliant. As we looked further into this, one thing we all learned was that the multiple dwellings law is not part of the zoning code. So now we are kind of circling back and looking at whether or not the multiple dwellings law applies to this project or not. Christine Mason, do you want to kind of start the discussion based on your memo that you sent to the board?
Sure. Well, there were 5 questions asked at the last meeting. The first 2 really are for the building inspector to answer. One of those questions was, how is the building department applying the multiple dwellings law? And if they aren't applying it, why not? And then the other questions that were more for us to answer are whether the planning board can request an interpretation of the multiple dwelling law from the ZBA, whether the applicant can apply for a variance of the multiple dwelling law as it relates, or excuse me, apply for a variance from the ZBA for the multiple dwelling law, and then also what happens if a provision in the multiple dwelling law conflicts with a provision in our village code. So I will just unless you want me to go very in depth, because it can be quite complicated, I will try to kind of give a cursory overview and answer those three questions. The first one is, can the planning board request an interpretation of the multiple dwelling law from the ZBA? So we did determine that the ZBA has jurisdiction over the multiple dwelling law. And that's because a provision in the multiple dwelling law essentially says that Board of Appeals, City Board of Appeals, can hear applications to vary or modify a provision of the multiple dwelling law that applies to their project. And villages are included within those cities. So essentially, the ZBA is permitted again to vary or modify any provisions of the multiple dwelling law. So that actually essentially answers the second question, which is, can an applicant request a variance of the multiple dwelling law? I know I'm jumping ahead, but that's just an FYI. So then once we determine that the ZBA has jurisdiction of the MDL, the next question is, does the ZBA's jurisdiction over the multiple dwelling law include the authority to issue interpretations? And our answer overall is no. We feel that they are, under the multiple dwellings law, the ZBA is limited to, again, varying or modifying provisions of the multiple dwelling law. It does not allow specifically for interpretations, even though our code allows for interpretations from a determination of the building inspector. The multiple dwelling law limits it. And so then that takes us to the last question. And excuse me if I'm skipping ahead on anything. Like I said, there's a lot here. So if you need me to go back, please let me know. But which takes precedent, the village code or the multiple dwelling law? And again, there's a provision that provides for this in the multiple dwelling law that essentially says that the more restricted provision takes precedence over the lesser requirement. So if something in our code is more restricted than the multiple dwelling law, that takes precedent. If something in the multiple dwelling law is more restricted than our code, again, that takes precedence. So I know I've gone through that very quickly. There's a lot there. So please, if you have questions or anything was unclear, revert back and ask me.
Does anybody, I mean, we all got this memo in advance, so hopefully we were able to read it. Does anybody have any questions about Christie's determination and what you just said and what's in the memo?
So I guess I need a little bit of a clarification. So this part of our code is not technically included in the section on zoning. It's a different code section. So if there's been a determination that a project is zoning compliant, that doesn't mean that it is or is not, that it is compliant with the multiple dwellings law. Just like any other code section, an application has to comply with all of these things.
Exactly. So we are not considering for instance, a zoning determination or zoning compliance determination to apply to the multiple dwellings law unless we were told otherwise, or unless a separate determination has been made outside of that. We consider it's a separate portion of the code. It's not part of the zoning ordinance. And so again, zoning determinations don't necessarily apply to the multiple dwelling law.
And that seems consistent with the fact that the ZBA can't issue an interpretation on it because it's not a zoning code.
No.
Okay, well, that makes sense. I mean, I have some questions about the multiple dwelling law statute itself, but I'd like to, I think, maybe hear more from Mr. Tavolacci or any other board members who have questions.
Well, before we get to that, because I think the big issue is, does the multiple dwellings law apply to this particular project?
Right.
And that would be the determination of Mr. Tavolacci. Before we get there, does anybody else have any questions of Ms. Mason with regards to some of the legal framework for this as we move forward? No? Okay. So the question is, does the multiple dwellings law apply to this project? For those of you just tuning in, Mr. Tavolacci had a little issue with his mic. He might have a little bit of echo, but we're going to unmute him and see what happens. Okay. Ashley, can you unmute Frank, please? Okay, Frank.
I actually did it myself.
You're up. Okay, good.
Is there an echo or can you hear me okay?
We hear you just fine now.
Great. Okay, so historically, when we do this zoning compliance checklist, and that's what it is, it's 11-item checklist. Lot area, lot frontage, floor ratio, setbacks. It's a real cursory review of the plan. I did not get into the multiple dwelling law when I made this determination of zoning compliance. I was strictly thinking of our zoning laws. But that doesn't mean that we can't or we should do it. In fact, I think the applicants should have the opportunity maybe to come back and comply to the multiple dwelling law. So we don't actually, the point where this checklist originates, we don't get really deep into the plans for zoning compliance. We don't check everything. It's just a cursory review with these 11 items, which is what I did. I did have discussions with Greg Cutler. We did subsequently get into a couple of the items of the multiple dwelling law as far as the rear yard setback and all that. But my original determination, I was following our zoning laws.
So are you of the opinion, because here's where the issue lies with us. The multiple dwelling law states that an interior lot, which is what this is, within 100 feet of the point of intersection of the two street lines, intersecting at an angle of 135 degrees or less, and that then kicks off the requirement of a rear yard.
Right. Yes.
Is this lot within 100 feet of the point of intersection of two street lines at an angle of 135 degrees or less? Would this provision of the law apply to this project? I think that's the bottom line question. Am I right, everybody?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the
So-
bottom.
Right.
So the bottom line answer is that project is more than 100 feet from the intersection of Mamaroneck Avenue and where the project sits. So that's the discussion I got into with Greg Cutler, that the project was more than 100 feet and the bulk requirement would not apply, so that rear yard setback of 30 feet would not apply. And that was, us collaborating on that type of thing. It wasn't, my determination solely. It was, we discussed it, and that's what the consensus was.
Okay, I read that statute a little differently. I read it as the chair said, it's not from the point of an intersection. It's the intersection of two street lines. So I don't think that the location of Mamaroneck Avenue and East Prospect, that intersection, and the intersection with Tompkins and East Prospect are the points that we're talking about. It says not an intersection of two street lines. And I would guess that probably it is within 100 feet of two street lines. And if the code wanted to say of an intersection, they would have said that and not said an intersection of two street lines. So
I actually think it's more than 100 feet from Tompkins also. I mean, I would have to check that, but that never came up. It was always from Mamaroneck Avenue. The discussions I had with Greg Cutler was we were talking about Mamaroneck Avenue.
And again, it doesn't say the street lines have to be on different streets. East Prospect takes a very deep bend at that point. So again, I don't know the definition of street line, and maybe somebody can help me with that, because I know what an intersection is, but we're two street lines. And I would think that the street line, because of the bend in the road, there can be two street lines. But can somebody help me with definition of a street line?
Yes.
I can answer that question. So A street line is a planning term that generally refers to the property line at the street. And in Mamaroneck's code, it's defined in the zoning chapter as the dividing line between a lot and a street.
So then it is within 100 feet.
So within 100 feet.
It's the intersection of two street lines. So it's talking about, the provision's trying to get a corner lot and what the issues would be with if you had a corner lot. So in this case, I mean, any property is within 100 feet of a street line because every property theoretically has a street line.
Right. But is it within 100 feet of an intersection of two street lines? So two property lines have to intersect. Two lines where the property meets the street have to intersect.
Right. So I think it is referring to the intersections of Mamaroneck Avenue and East Prospect Hill Road, or the other on the other end.
Hopkins.
That was addressed. The distance between those two intersections is more than 100 feet. We have that in the memo from May that Ms. Mason wrote with Greg Cutler. So we have a little map, and we have the property is approximately 185 feet from Mamaroneck Avenue and East Prospect, and approximately 225 feet from Tompkins and East Prospect. Okay. So we know what a street line is. We learned something tonight.
So I guess I need to understand, I need to visualize it. So a street line with regard to this property would be, is it in the middle of the street? Is it the sidewalk? Is it
It's where the property line meets the street. So depending on, sometimes sidewalks are on private property, but it's where the public realm ends and the private realm begins.
Cindy, look at the second page of the May 22nd memo.
Yeah, I did. I mean, so how is this different? I mean, this is specifically talking about an interior lot. So how could you ever have an interior lot with two street lines intersecting? That would make it a corner lot, wouldn't it?
Right. So that's why it has to be within 100 feet.
No. But this is specifically says an interior lot has to be within, right, the 100 feet of the two street lines.
In order for this to apply.
Then why wouldn't the code language just say 100 feet of an intersection?
Because planners wrote the code.
No, if lawyers wrote it, they get paid by the word. I understand the extra words then.
Is your answer.
It's odd to me. Why wouldn't you just say the intersection?
Well, this code, my understanding of this code is that it was not written by anyone here in the village of Mamaroneck. It was cut and paste.
But they adopted it.
But I'm surprised to learn that street line is actually defined in our code.
Yeah, I didn't see that. So that's very helpful. Thank you.
It's in a different chapter, but I mean, I think it's a pretty standard term in the planning world.
That's why we have planners here.
Right.
So Frank, it's your determination that the multiple dwellings law does not apply to this project.
Only to that rear yard setback because of the being more than 100 feet. Whether the multiple dwelling law doesn't apply in, the other 300 pages of the multiple dwelling law, I'm not sure.
Okay.
And that's why it's up to the applicant's design professionals to make sure that they comply with the multiple dwelling law.
Okay.
Besides myself or a planner, Ashley or whomever.
Okay. So as far as the rear yard setback is, though, is everyone okay with moving on from this? Because at this point in time, we can make a secret determination while we deal with some other open issues. The applicant's going to have to look at the multiple dwellings law and determine whether there's anything that has to change with that.
Right.
But as far as the environmental impact, right now, this particular law does not impact us moving forward with that. Is that a statement that everyone agrees with? I see one
Yes.
person.
Yes, I'm fine with that.
The other issue that's been raised, obviously, is the flood zone. And this we addressed early on. I went back and, I have memos and whatnot, emails from Greg Cutler, who isn't here to explain himself. He's no longer with the Village of Mamaroneck. But he determined that the flood requirements, this project met the flood requirements appropriate for the zone that it sits in. We've received some public comments that challenge that determination. I guess that's a good way of putting it. And that the building should be raised 2 feet. And I'm not conversant in the flood code. Now, Frank, under normal circumstances, nothing's normal about anything about 2020. The building inspector is the flood guy. I mean, I know that you're acting as the building inspector now, so I don't know if you're also the acting flood person. But I couldn't even tell, but I tried to follow this up yesterday and look at the FEMA maps. I couldn't even tell what zone this was in. It looked to me like it was in an AE zone. If that's correct, then Greg cites the code and tells us that it's totally compliant with it. But Frank, do you have anything to enlighten us with this? Give us...
Actually, I don't, because all that floodplain information was gleaned from Greg Cutler, and I can't add anything to what he said or what he determined on it. I'm not a floodplain manager, so I'm not even going to attempt it.
I'm a floodplain manager. Okay. Is anyone in the village right now acting as the floodplain manager?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Okay. Ashley, do you have any knowledge about? I mean, I know this is complicated, every village is different. You haven't been here really long enough to get into looking at flood maps and things like that.
If I could jump in, because I know
go right ahead.
Yeah, if something's deemed that it's a floodplain permit is required, my office will be reviewing it in coordination with the building department. But until, that's usually after the determination is made that a permit is needed, it comes my way. As far as I'm concerned,
application for a flood permit. No one's ever said that this project needs a flood permit. They're more than 100 feet from the river.
Right.
I think through that.
And I believe what Greg's, if I remember, this is off memory, it came up about the definition of what that lower floor of the building is. And, it's not, because it's unfinished, it's storage, it's parking, that, it can flood. I mean, that does not have to be 2 feet above.
Right.
So that was his interpretation, and that's kind of been accepted.
Things like that. Yes, I pulled out this memo too that we got from his email.
The applicant's attorney had their hand raised. They may have something to add to that. If you'd like me to unmute them.
Sure. Bring her up. Bring him up. I'm sorry. I keep confusing our attorney.
Good evening. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Good. Thank you for the record. My name is Tony Joffrey, a member of the law firm Cuddy and Fader. I also have on the call Rex Gedney, our project architect. You may recall that we discussed this at your April 22nd meeting, and we went through this issue, and Greg Cutler also did comment on this. That lower elevation, that lower floor that is being discussed right now will be used for purposes such as storage, parking, and access, which is permitted to be at that elevation. And we're permitted within the floodplain as long as flood vents are being provided. So we are addressing that requirement. This was discussed with your board on April 22nd, and Greg Cutler did indicate that we satisfied the requirements.
That seems to be what I remember too, but I just want to clarify everything, get everything out there, so we can move forward here. Does any member of the planning board have any issue with that statement and where we are with this? I mean, remember, we still have a lot of review here to go, and they're going to go to HCDM and have quite a thorough review with the consistency. No? Okay. Okay, thank you. I think that sort of answers the burning questions that we had before we wanted to make a secret determination. Back when we first got this application, we did get a recommendation from the village planner at the time that this would be a negative declaration. We all got a copy, I think, of the short environmental assessment form. The questions there are 11 questions that we have to ask ourselves and answer whether there is either no or a small impact or a moderate to large impact. And I think that this warrants going through the questions and having everyone come to agreement with the determination that was made by the planner at the time. The first question is, will the proposed action create a material conflict with an adopted land use plan or zoning regulations? I think we just determined the answer to that is no. If you disagree with anything I'm saying, speak up, but I'm just going to keep going. 2, will the proposed action result in a change of use or intensity of use of the land? Oh, there you go. Thank you. I don't have to, everybody can follow. Thanks.
No problem.
Okay. So is it a no or a small impact or a moderate to large impact? And right now we're saying a small or no impact. 3, will the proposed action impair the character or quality of this existing community? The building fits in with the buildings around it, so we've got a no answer to that as well. Will the proposed action have an impact on the environmental characteristics that cause the establishment of a critical environmental area? There's no critical environmental area in the neighborhood close to that. Will the proposed action result in an adverse change in the existing level of traffic or affect existing infrastructure for mass transit, biking, or walkway? The applicant did give us traffic study information, and we're talking about a very small impact. So that's checked no. Will the proposed action impact existing A, public or private water supplies or public or private waste water utilities?
Kathy, I think you skipped 6.
Oh, I did?
Did you?
Let's go back. Will the proposed action cause an increase in the use of energy and it fails to incorporate reasonable available energy conservation or renewable energy opportunities? We do have as part of our code that we need to have some green building technology incorporated in the buildings. So that's a no.
Kathy, can I ask
7.
a question? Just a procedural question is, before we sent these things to HCZM, I thought we were just typing these actions, not making a final secret determination, because once it goes to HCZM, they may have some input that changes the impact of the thing. Do we have to make that determination now, or we just have to type this action before it goes?
We typed it.
What's the procedural question, or the procedural answer to that question?
Well, the other board can't make their approval until the seeker is closed. So this board would, as lead agency, would need to make its negative declaration before any other board could act.
Before they can, but they've gone already to HCZM preliminarily, correct?
Preliminarily, but they can't go further until we make a secret determination.
We never saw anything from HCZM, right? Usually
No.
they give us a memo. Are they still working on this?
Preliminary.
No, well, they look like they've seen it 3 times, the most recent on April 15th, but they didn't send us anything saying that they had issues or.
Understanding is they're waiting for us to make the secret determination.
But I remember some other applications, they've been rather, vocal about their suggestions on how we proceed with SECRA. A few recent projects come to mind.
Yeah, I
I truly can't remember, but maybe the applicant remembers if they.
Didn't get anything from them, but that doesn't mean nothing exists.
All right, you're unmuted.
Yeah, thank you. So typically what happens in this process is we appear before Harbor Coastal to do a preliminary review. During that time, the other commissions or boards that may be involved are going to make a determination of whether or not they would challenge your lead agency status. So that's the original purpose and the general purpose of that stage in the process. Then we come back to this board for this board to make a determination. Many times it's a type 2 action, so there's no secret determination that needs to be made. And then we have to go back to Harbor Coastal for consistency review. So we, at this point, need this board to take action for secret purposes and hopefully adopt this negative declaration so that we can go back to Harbor Coastal so that they can make a consistency determination.
But they've had this on 3 of their agendas, and I don't think we've heard anything from them one way or the other. And I know that was part of the preliminary review, but usually if there's some big problem, we would have heard about it.
Correct.
Right.
Some big problem, we would have heard about it. Right. But I also don't think that, I don't know, I don't think we need to hold this up to ask them if they see a big problem. If you look at these criteria, these 11 criteria, there's not enough here of an impact to bring this to a full secret review. There may be issues that get uncovered along the way that need to be addressed, but is there enough here to kick off a full secret review?
Yeah, well, that's one issue, but I know that we've had all our concerns about view sheds that are caused by this project, and even though it is for the most part as of right, the planning board has concerns about the character of the neighborhood and bulk and density issues. So I don't want to create a negative declaration and then not be able to have
Negative
about that.
But we also have site plan review coming up, and those issues, which are not enough to determine significant environmental impact, can be addressed during the site plan review.
That is absolutely correct. At this point, a determination for secret does not necessarily mean that you can't still conduct your site plan and special permit review. And again, I remind this board that there are certain densities that are required pursuant to the special permit. 5 units are the absolute minimum that are required pursuant to the code, and we're only proposing 8.
Okay.
All right, everyone comfortable with moving forward? Okay. Question 7 was whether there would be an impact on water supply and wastewater treatment utilities. The answer is no. Will the proposed action impair the character or quality of important historic, archaeological, architectural, or aesthetic resources? The actual building that's on the site now is quite old, but it's not listed or of any historical significance, and that was documented. Will the proposed action result in an adverse change to natural resources such as wetlands, water bodies, groundwater, air quality, flora, and fauna? The answer is no. Will the proposed action result in an increase in the potential for erosion, flooding, or drainage problems? And that answer is also no. And the final one is, will the proposed action create a hazard to environmental resources or human health? And that too is no. So, determination of significance. I hope that everyone got a chance to look at this. Basically, this paragraph that Ashley has put up on the screen just reiterates what we just said from the first page, and just describes the application. Infill housing to build a 4-story residential development with 8 one-bedroom units in the C2 district. Rear building is located in the special flood hazard area and therefore subject to requirements of Chapter 186 flood damage prevention. The base flood elevation is 12 feet, and therefore only the basement story at the rear of the building is within the floodplain. And as we discussed earlier, it's used only for storage and access and parking. I believe that's what Mr. Joffrey said. And there will be flow through and vents to the water to flow through in the event of a flood in that area. Anybody will have any discussion with regards to this? No? Okay, then we need a motion to make a negative declaration, a negative determination for the secret determination so that this applicant can go on to consistency review at HCZM.
So moved.
Need a second?
Second?
Okay, vote, Richard,
No.
John,
Yes.
Cindy,
Yes.
and I vote yes. Okay. You're free to go forward. We'll see you back here again. But before
Thank
we,
you very much. Have a good evening.
thank you, stick around just in case. We do have an open public hearing. We have a number of participants here, attendees. I don't know. There was nothing really with regards to the public hearing on the special permit that we discussed tonight, but, and we did receive some comments in writing in advance of today's meeting, and they're posted on the website and part of the public record. But if anybody has any other comments they would like to make, if not, we are done for the evening. So Ashley, if anybody's raising their hand.
There's no one raising your hand. If you're calling in by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand, or use the raise your hand feature in the bottom of the participants box. I'm not seeing any hands raised.
Okay. Okay, so we accomplished what we were trying to accomplish.
Oh,
today. We all learned.
there is, sorry, there was one just popped up.
Okay. Somebody who's here.
Lucia, I've unmuted you
Okay, could you give us
on my end.
Could you give us your full name? I believe you are from the Regatta, correct? Lucia, you have a comment in addition to the email that you sent earlier this week?
You're unmuted.
No. Now what do we do?
I can enable the chat box, and you could use the chat box if you're not able to speak. Okay. The chat box has been enabled. Let me see if anyone's emailed. No. There's been no emails and no chats in the chat box.
Okay. Okay. So I guess we'll be back here again at some point in time. Plenty of opportunity for the public to weigh in. We did receive, as I mentioned in the email. Turn your volume up if she can't hear us. So that's why she's not doing anything. You want to tell her, turn your volume up? Now she's muted. Ah, the joys of remote. Thank you, Ashley. I think it's going to be more a statement than a question.
Otherwise, the board will continue to accept comments via email.
Public hearing is going to be open for a while. I mean, we did receive an email from Lucia. I'm assuming this is Lucia Tatavito, who lives at the Regatta, with regards to her concerns. I could read these into the record, and hopefully that will suffice. Dear Planning Board, I reside in one of the Regatta condo units that would be greatly affected by the development proposed at 139 East Prospect. One, I think the development should have a rear yard of at least 30 feet to give the property decent separation from the Regatta. Residents of the new building and those of the Regatta should not be deprived of light and air by having the buildings too close. Two, the comments that the proposed project would not result in any additional restriction of access to the drive aisle offers little comfort to folks like me who worry about difficulties of our fire equipment reaching our apartments. Please have the applicant and the village fire department tell whether the Regatta meets current fire code. Also, let us know whether we meet village standards. I think that's an issue for the Regatta and not for the planning board in this project. The fire department has signed off on this project and said that the access to the back of the buildings would actually be improved by this project. Three, I'm sending photos of the drive aisle adjacent to our building. There are parking spots here that would seem to impede fire equipment access. Well, the fire department doesn't really agree with you. These are never shown on the site drawings, but they should be so the planning board has a reasonable understanding of the true circumstances. We leave the fire code and the fire determinations up to the fire department and the fire inspector. And they both have looked at the plans and they both have no problem with it. We have a thank you. This is the back of the Regatta concerns, the Regatta concerns building a building too close to the Regatta. I understand they are allowed to build, but why does it have to be on top of the Regatta? I think that it's clear that we have to follow the codes and the laws. And as Mr. Verney pointed out, this building is as of right. It meets the zoning code. And although we will try our best and again offer, at our last meeting, I believe it was, Mr. Sposino offered his assistance if the two parties would like to get together and have discussion as good neighbors would. We certainly would encourage that and see if anything comes of that. But in the meantime, the applicant is free to go on to HCZM, and the public is free to participate in all of the public meetings with regards to the project and have their voices and their opinions noted. Anybody have anything else to add to that? No? Okay, I need a motion to close tonight's meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank
Beth.
you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Right.
You.
Night.